Have you ever discovered that the future someone promised you had quietly disappeared long before you even knew it existed? If you think betrayal always begins with hatred, my story might change your mind. My name is Kiera Dimitrova, and until one unforgettable evening, I believed my biggest challenge in life was simply earning enough money to someday buy a place of my own. I had no idea that a home had already been waiting for me for years, hidden behind lies so carefully constructed that even I never questioned them. What happened next destroyed the image I had of my family, exposed a powerful businessman willing to erase anyone standing in his way, and forced me to choose between protecting the people who raised me or fighting for the truth. Before I tell you everything, let me introduce myself properly. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a freelance architectural illustrator. Most of my projects involve restoring old buildings digitally for museums, historians, and preservation groups. I've always loved houses with history because every crack in a wall and every worn wooden floor tells a story about the people who lived there before us. That passion started when I was a teenager, spending weekends sketching forgotten neighborhoods while my friends preferred shopping malls or movie theaters. I live alone in a modest apartment on the edge of the city. It's small enough that my kitchen and living room practically share the same space, but I've never complained about it. The rent fits my budget, and every month I quietly set aside part of my income, hoping that one day I would finally have enough savings for a down payment on a house. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was stable, peaceful, and honest. Growing up, my parents constantly reminded me how difficult money had always been for our family. My father worked in business consulting, and my mother handled administrative work for several companies over the years. Whenever I asked why we never owned property ourselves, they would sigh, exchange tired looks, and explain that life had simply been expensive. They often told me that raising me had required countless sacrifices, and that buying a home was something only fortunate people could accomplish. I never questioned them. In fact, I admired them for enduring so much without complaining. Because of those conversations, I never asked my parents for financial help after college. I paid my own bills, accepted every freelance project I could find, and convinced myself that struggling was simply part of becoming independent. Whenever I felt discouraged, I reminded myself that everyone moves through life at a different pace. The one person who always encouraged my dreams was my grandmother, Mireya Dimitrova. Grandma had retired several years earlier and decided to spend most of her time overseas after marrying her longtime companion late in life. Even though we lived in different countries, we spoke regularly through video calls. She always asked about my work, wanted to see my latest drawings, and laughed whenever I showed her another sketch of an old cottage or historic townhouse. She never asked how much money I earned. She never pressured me about getting married. She simply listened. Looking back now, those conversations became some of the happiest memories I still have. Several weeks before everything changed, my parents announced they would celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary with a large family gathering. They rented an elegant banquet hall, invited relatives from different states, and even included business partners and longtime family friends. My mother insisted everyone dress formally, because she wanted the evening to feel unforgettable. At first, I almost declined the invitation. I had deadlines approaching, and traveling across the city during the busiest week of the month sounded exhausting. But my grandmother surprised everyone by saying she would fly back specifically for the celebration. That alone convinced me to attend. The evening arrived faster than I expected. The banquet hall glowed with warm golden lights reflecting from crystal chandeliers hanging above dozens of decorated tables. Soft piano music filled the room while guests greeted one another with laughter, hugs, and stories they hadn't shared in years. Professional photographers wandered through the crowd capturing every smile as waiters carried trays of appetizers between conversations. From the outside, everything looked like the perfect family celebration. My parents smiled constantly. Relatives congratulated them for reaching 25 years together. Business associates praised my father's recent successes. My mother looked happier than I had seen her in years. Nothing about that evening suggested our lives were only minutes away from changing forever. Grandma arrived shortly before dinner. The moment she entered the hall, several relatives rushed over to welcome her home. She looked elegant in a deep blue dress, carrying herself with the calm confidence that had always made people naturally gather around her. Despite her age, her eyes remained sharp, observant, and full of warmth. When she finally hugged me, she held my shoulders for a second longer than usual. "You've gotten thinner," she said with a gentle smile. "I've just been busy working," I replied. "You always work too much. I guess someone has to pay rent." She chuckled softly, though something about her expression changed almost immediately. It wasn't concern. It was confusion. She looked at me carefully before asking a question, so casually that I barely paid attention at first. "How is the house?" I laughed politely. "My apartment is fine." She tilted her head. "No, dear. I'm talking about your house." For a moment, I assumed she was joking. "My future house, hopefully." Her smile slowly disappeared. "I mean the house I bought for you." Every sound around us seemed to fade. The music was still playing. People were still talking. Glasses continued clinking together across the room. But inside my mind, everything stopped. I stared at my grandmother without understanding what she had just said. Then I answered as honestly as I could. "What house?" For several long seconds, Grandma simply stared at me. The warmth that had been in her eyes only moments earlier disappeared, replaced by quiet disbelief. She searched my face as if expecting me to laugh and admit I was joking. I wasn't. "I don't understand," I said. "What house?" She slowly lowered the glass she had been holding. "You never moved in?" I shook my head. "I've lived in rented apartments since college." The color drained from her face. Around us, relatives continued chatting without noticing that something had gone terribly wrong. My parents were across the room greeting guests, completely unaware that a conversation lasting less than a minute had already begun unraveling years of secrets. Grandma looked past me toward them. Her expression became unusually serious. "Kiara," she said quietly, "don't mention this to anyone yet." The sudden change in her voice made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "I need to ask your parents a few questions first." Before I could respond, one of my cousins interrupted us, asking everyone to gather for photographs. Grandma forced a polite smile and nodded, but I could tell her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The rest of the photo session felt strangely uncomfortable. Whenever I glanced toward my parents, I noticed my grandmother watching them instead. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was observing. Dinner began shortly afterward. The banquet hall buzzed with cheerful conversations as waiters served course after course. My father stood to give a speech celebrating 25 years of marriage. Guests applauded several times while he thanked friends, relatives, and business partners for supporting our family through difficult years. Normally, I would have enjoyed hearing his stories. Instead, all I could think about was Grandma's question. What house? Why would she believe she had bought one for me? And why had I never heard about it? After dessert was served, Grandma finally stood from her chair. She gently tapped a spoon against her glass. The room gradually became quiet. "I only have one question tonight," she said calmly. She turned toward my parents. "When exactly did Kiara move into the house I purchased for her?" Silence spread across the banquet hall. My father blinked twice before forcing a smile. "Oh, that." He laughed awkwardly. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." Grandma didn't laugh. "What misunderstanding?" My mother quickly joined the conversation. "Mireya, perhaps this isn't the best time." "It is precisely the right time." The atmosphere changed immediately. Conversations stopped. Several relatives exchanged confused looks. One of my father's business partners quietly set down his wine glass. I looked back and forth between my parents and my grandmother, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Instead, my father stepped closer and lowered his voice. "We'll discuss this privately." Grandma folded her hands. "No, I don't want to create a scene." Then answer my question." His smile disappeared. For the first time that evening, I saw genuine nervousness on his face. "We thought." He began before stopping. "You thought what?" Grandma asked. My mother spoke before he could continue. "We believed Kiera already knew." "I know nothing," I interrupted. Both of them turned toward me. Their expressions shifted almost instantly, as though they were trying to calculate what I had already learned. "I've never owned a house," I said. "I've never even been told there was one." No one spoke. The silence became almost unbearable. Finally, Grandma took a slow breath. "I think dinner is over." Without another word, she returned to her seat. The celebration continued awkwardly, but the cheerful atmosphere never returned. Guests whispered among themselves. Some relatives quietly left early. Even the musicians seemed unsure whether they should continue playing. By the end of the evening, my parents avoided being alone with either me or Grandma. Every conversation they had felt rushed. Every smile looked forced. As everyone prepared to leave, Grandma walked over to me. "I'm staying at the Grand Meridian Hotel," she said. "I want you to come tomorrow morning." "Why?" "Because I need to show you something." "What is it?" "You deserve answers." She gently squeezed my hand before leaving the banquet hall. I watched her disappear through the revolving doors. Then I turned toward my parents. Neither of them met my eyes. Instead, they quietly walked to their car without saying a single word to me. That silence frightened me more than any explanation could have. The next morning, I arrived at the Grand Meridian shortly after 9. Grandma was already waiting in the lounge with a leather briefcase resting beside her chair. When she saw me, she smiled gently. "I'm glad you came." "I barely slept," I admitted. "I kept thinking about last night." "So did I." She stood, picked up the briefcase, and led me upstairs to her suite. Once the door closed behind us, she placed the worn leather case on the dining table. Then she unlocked it. Inside were neatly organized folders, envelopes, photographs, and official documents that looked years old. She carefully removed the first folder and placed it in front of me. "Read the name." My hands trembled as I opened it. Across the top of the first page, printed in clear black letters, were words I never expected to see. "Property Purchase Agreement. Beneficiary, Kiera Dimitrova." My heart skipped a beat. I looked up at Grandma. She nodded slowly. "Now," she said softly, "it's time for you to learn what should have been yours all along." I couldn't take my eyes off the document. My name appeared on every page. Not once. Not by accident. Again and again. Beneficiary. Future owner. Primary recipient. The signatures, official seals, and legal stamps looked authentic. Even the purchase date shocked me. Grandma had bought the property 8 years earlier, only a few weeks after I graduated from university. I slowly looked up. This can't be real." "It is," Grandma answered quietly. "But why didn't you ever tell me?" "I wanted it to be a surprise." She sat across from me and folded her hands. "My plan was simple. I hired a licensed property management company to maintain the house until you were ready. They were supposed to handle inspections, pay the taxes, and make sure everything stayed in good condition. I thought it would be a gift waiting for you when the time was right." I stared at the paperwork. "So why didn't they contact me?" "They were instructed to communicate through me until ownership was formally transferred." "And after that?" Grandma's expression darkened. "That's where everything became strange." She reached into the briefcase again and removed another folder. Inside were printed emails, letters, annual inspection reports, maintenance invoices. Everything appeared normal for the first 5 years. Then, without warning, the records simply stopped. "No inspections?" She shook her head. "No reports. No maintenance. Nothing. I contacted the management company several times," she continued. "Each time they assured me everything was fine. They claimed you had become more involved with the property yourself and preferred fewer updates. I frowned. I never spoke to them. I know. She slid another document toward me. I only realized something was wrong after preparing for this trip. I wanted to bring you the original house key as an anniversary surprise. When I requested the latest property file, they couldn't provide recent photographs. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Did they lose them? They said the files had been transferred. Transferred to whom? They refused to answer. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I had entered the hotel expecting clarification. Instead, every answer created two new questions. Grandma stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the city. I don't believe this happened because of a simple administrative mistake. You think someone did this intentionally? I don't know. She turned back toward me. But we're going to find out. An hour later, we left the hotel together. Grandma insisted we visit the property before contacting anyone else. If the house is exactly where it should be, she said, then we'll deal with the paperwork afterward. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. During the drive, Grandma described the house she remembered buying. It wasn't large, she said with a nostalgic smile. Just 2 stories. A small stone exterior. Green shutters. A workshop in the back that I knew you'd turn into an art studio someday. Every detail made the place feel more real. More personal. Almost as if I had already lived there in another life. Nearly 40 minutes later, our navigation announced we had arrived. I looked through the windshield. Nothing matched Grandma's description. Instead of a quiet residential street lined with older homes, enormous construction fences surrounded the entire block. Tower cranes rose high above unfinished luxury buildings. Massive promotional banners advertised an exclusive redevelopment project promising elegant villas, premium retail space, and private gardens. Luxury begins here. Reservations now open. Grandma slowly removed her sunglasses. No. She whispered the word so softly I almost didn't hear it. This isn't possible. We parked nearby and walked toward the entrance. Security guards stood beside a modern sales office built almost entirely from glass. Inside, architects spoke with wealthy clients while digital displays showcased expensive model homes. Everything looked polished, professional, permanent. I approached the reception desk. "Excuse me," I said politely. "We're looking for a house that used to stand on this address." The receptionist smiled professionally. "That property is now part of Hale Urban Development's Heritage Heights project." "I understand," I replied. "But who owned it before construction?" She typed something into her computer. A few seconds later, her smile faded. "I'm sorry. I can't discuss ownership records." Grandma stepped forward. "I purchased that property." The receptionist hesitated. "I'm afraid I still can't release information." "Then who can?" "Our site manager." A few minutes later, a man wearing an expensive suit entered the lobby. He introduced himself only as Mr. Carson. His confidence disappeared the moment Grandma showed him the purchase agreement. He examined the document carefully. Then he looked at me. "You should leave this matter alone." The words caught me completely off guard. "What?" He placed the paperwork back on the desk. "If I were you, I'd forget this property." Grandma narrowed her eyes. "Why would you say that?" Mr. Carson forced a smile. "Because ownership issues this old become complicated. We're prepared for complicated." "I'm sure you are." He leaned slightly closer. "But not every battle is worth fighting." Without another word, he walked away. Neither of us moved. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet somehow, it felt more threatening than reassuring. As we turned to leave the sales office, I noticed an elderly groundskeeper sweeping leaves near the outer fence. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't watching the construction. He was watching us. The moment our eyes met, he quietly set his broom aside. He waited until we reached the parking lot before slowly approaching. He glanced over both shoulders to make sure no one was nearby. Then he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting years." He looked directly at me. "For someone who actually belongs to that house." For a moment, I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. Grandma stepped closer before I could respond. "What do you mean?" she asked. The elderly man glanced toward the construction site again. Several workers were loading materials onto trucks, while security guards chatted near the entrance. Only after making sure no one was paying attention did he speak. "My name is Elias. I used to maintain this neighborhood long before all of this happened." He slowly pointed beyond the construction fences. "Your house is still there." I felt my heartbeat quicken. "What?" "They never demolished it." I exchanged a confused look with Grandma. "If it's still standing," I asked, "why can't we see it?" "Because they built everything else around it." Elias lowered his voice even further. "They fenced it off. They've been keeping people away from it for years." Grandma looked stunned. "Why would anyone do that?" "Because the house was never the prize." He looked directly at me. "The land underneath it was." Those words settled heavily in the silence between us. Elias motioned for us to follow him. Instead of walking toward the main entrance, he led us around the outer edge of the development, following an old service road hidden behind rows of temporary storage containers. After several minutes, the noise of heavy machinery faded. We stopped beside a section of aging chain-link fence covered with climbing vines. "There," Elias whispered. I looked through a small opening. Hidden behind rows of unfinished luxury homes stood an old stone house with faded green shutters. My breath caught in my throat. It looked neglected. The garden was overgrown. Paint peeled from the window frames. But it was still standing, exactly as Grandma had described. Tears filled her eyes. "It's still here." She reached through the fence as if she could somehow touch it. I knew it. I couldn't stop staring. That little house had existed all these years while I struggled to pay rent, believing I had nowhere else to go. The realization hurt more than I expected. Elias carefully removed a worn envelope from his backpack. "I think these belong with you." Inside were dozens of old photographs. Every picture had a handwritten date on the back. Some showed the neighborhood before construction. Others captured surveyors measuring the land. Several showed expensive black SUVs arriving almost every week. Then I found one photograph that made my stomach turn. My parents. They were standing beside a tall man wearing a tailored gray suit. All three were smiling. Behind them stood the stone house. Grandma leaned closer. "I've never seen this man before." Elias nodded. "His name is Vesper Hale, the owner of Hale Urban Development." I stared at the photograph. My parents knew him? They met many times. Business meetings? Elias slowly shook his head. They weren't acting like strangers. They looked like partners. The air suddenly felt much colder. Grandma flipped through more photographs. Each image revealed another meeting. Different dates. Different vehicles. Different paperwork being carried inside the house. This wasn't a single visit. It had happened repeatedly. "But why?" I whispered. "My parents never worked in real estate." Elias reached into his backpack again. This time he removed a small external hard drive. "I kept copies of everything." "What is it?" I asked. "My security camera recordings." "You recorded the neighborhood?" He nodded. "Years ago, residents worried developers would pressure homeowners to sell. So I installed cameras overlooking the street. They weren't perfect, but they captured enough." We drove back to Grandma's hotel immediately. Using my laptop, we connected the hard drive. Hours of footage appeared. Most clips showed ordinary neighborhood life. Children riding bicycles. Neighbors walking dogs. Delivery trucks. Nothing unusual. Then Elias paused one recording. There. The timestamp showed a morning nearly 5 years earlier. A black luxury sedan stopped outside the stone house. Vesper Hale stepped out first. Seconds later, my parents arrived in another vehicle. The four of them entered the property together. No lawyers. No government officials. Just the three people I trusted most meeting privately with one of the city's most powerful developers. Another recording showed them returning several weeks later carrying large document cases. Then another. And another. The meetings continued for months. Grandma covered her mouth. They never told me. I couldn't speak. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Whatever had happened to the house, my parents hadn't simply known about it. They had been deeply involved from the beginning. Just when I thought the shock couldn't become any greater, Elias opened one final folder on the hard drive. It contained scanned copies of internal planning maps. One map immediately caught my attention. A bright red circle surrounded only one property. Not the entire neighborhood. Only Grandma's house. Across the top of the page, someone had typed a single sentence. Primary acquisition required before project approval. At the bottom of the document appeared one signature. Vesper Hale. Suddenly everything made sense. The luxury development had never started with dozens of properties. It had started with one. Our house. And someone had been willing to erase its true owner to make sure no one ever stood in the way. I kept reading the planning map over and over. The words never changed. Primary acquisition required before project approval. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The entire luxury development depended on obtaining Grandma's property first. Without it, the project could never move forward. I leaned back in my chair and tried to process everything. My parents knew, I whispered. They knew all along. Grandma remained silent. The disappointment on her face hurt even more than my own confusion. After several minutes, Elias spoke. There is one more person you should meet. Grandma looked at him. Who? The former director of the property management company. I finally found him last month. He retired years ago and moved outside the city. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I had no way to contact you. That same afternoon, Elias drove us to a quiet lakeside town nearly 2 hours away. The former director lived in a modest white cottage overlooking the water. His name was Leonard Brooks. When he opened the door and saw the property documents in Grandma's hands, his expression immediately changed. I was wondering when someone would finally come. He invited us inside without another question. His home was simple, filled with shelves of old files and neatly labeled storage boxes. After we explained everything, Leonard disappeared into another room. He returned carrying a faded archive box. I never threw these away, he said. I couldn't. Inside were backup copies of correspondence dating back almost a decade. Letters. Inspection reports. Maintenance invoices. Digital storage disks. Printed email logs. Everything. He carefully spread the documents across the dining table. We managed your property exactly as instructed. For years, everything was normal. So what changed? Grandma asked. Leonard sighed. We received notice that all future communication regarding the property had to be redirected through legal representatives connected to Hale Urban Development. Grandma frowned. I never authorized that. I know. We questioned it. They sent paperwork that appeared completely legitimate. What happened after that? Leonard removed another folder. We continued sending reports. But every email bounced back. Certified letters disappeared. Phone calls were redirected. Whenever we requested confirmation, someone insisted the owner had chosen not to receive further updates. Grandma slowly shook her head. I never received a single one. I believe you. Leonard opened one final envelope. I kept this because something felt wrong. Inside was a photocopy of an authorization form. At first glance, it looked official. Then I noticed the signature. It was supposed to be Grandma's. It wasn't. The handwriting was similar. but not identical. Someone had forged it. Grandma immediately recognized it. That's not my signature. Leonard nodded. I realized that after I retired. But by then the redevelopment had already begun. My chest tightened. So someone created fake authorization documents. Yes. And used them to cut Grandma off from her own property. Exactly. Elias folded his arms. They didn't just steal land. They isolated the rightful owner first. The room fell silent. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from my mother. Where are you? We need to talk. Please come home tonight. I stared at the screen. Only hours earlier, I would have rushed to answer. Now I wasn't sure I even recognized the people sending those messages. Grandma looked at me carefully. You don't have to go. I looked back at the forged signature lying on the table. No, I think I do. That evening, I drove to my parents' house alone. The atmosphere inside felt strangely tense. Neither of them offered me dinner. Neither asked how I was doing. My father simply closed the living room door. What has your grandmother been telling you? I took a slow breath. She told me about the house. Neither of them spoke. I've seen the purchase agreement. Silence. I've seen photographs. My mother's face turned pale. I've watched security footage. My father's shoulders stiffened. And I've seen forged documents. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Finally, my father spoke. You don't understand the whole story. Then explain it. He looked toward the window before answering. That land became extremely valuable. I know. The entire neighborhood was changing. I know. Hale approached us. I waited. He said the redevelopment would benefit everyone. So you helped him? My father lowered his eyes. We believed there was no other choice. No other choice? The project couldn't move forward while your grandmother's property remained untouched. I stared at him in disbelief. So you decided to remove her from the equation? It wasn't supposed to happen like this. My mother finally began crying. We thought the house would eventually be compensated. You thought? I asked. I spent years paying rent. I worked every weekend. I gave up vacations. I believed we were struggling. You watched all of it. Neither of them answered. My father quietly admitted the truth. Hale promised us investment opportunities. He said everyone would profit. So you traded my future for his project. He couldn't deny it. The silence became his confession. I stood up. We're done. As I reached the front door, my father spoke one last time. If you expose this, you'll destroy this family. I turned around. No, you already did. The next morning, Grandma called every close relative and asked them to gather once more. Officially, it was to finish celebrating the anniversary that had ended so awkwardly. Unofficially, it would become the day every hidden life finally faced the truth. By early evening, the banquet hall looked almost identical to the anniversary celebration a few days earlier. The same crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. The same round tables were covered with white linens. Many of the same relatives filled the room. Although this time the conversations were quieter. Everyone knew something serious had happened after the previous gathering, even if they didn't know exactly what. My parents arrived together. They smiled politely at guests, pretending everything was normal. Then Vesper Hale entered. He shook hands with several business associates, accepted congratulations from people who admired his successful developments, and took his seat near the front of the room. If anyone looked at him that evening, they would have seen a respected businessman. Only a handful of us knew what was hiding beneath that polished image. Grandma waited until dinner was served. Then she stood. She didn't tap a glass this time. She simply walked to the microphone. Thank you all for coming again, she began calmly. I won't keep you long. My family deserves the truth. The room became completely silent. She nodded toward me. I carried a projector to the front of the hall and connected my laptop. The first image appeared on the large screen. It was the original purchase agreement. My name, the property address, Grandma's signature. A few relatives leaned forward in confusion. Then came the second image. The house itself, still standing behind construction fences. Whispers spread across the room. Next came the photographs Elias had taken over the years. Picture after picture showed my parents meeting privately with Vesper Hale outside the property. Different dates, different seasons, always the same people. Several guests turned toward my parents in disbelief. My mother lowered her head. My father remained perfectly still. I continued to the next folder. Security camera footage began playing. The videos clearly showed repeated visits to the property long before redevelopment officially began. No one spoke. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Finally, I displayed the forged authorization form. Then, beside it, I placed several authentic signatures from Grandma's passport and legal records. The difference was impossible to ignore. Gasps echoed across the room. Before anyone could respond, the ballroom doors opened. Leonard Brooks walked inside carrying 2 archive boxes. I managed this property for years, he announced. And these records were never meant to disappear. He handed copies of the archived correspondence to several relatives, including 2 attorneys who happened to be attending the gathering. They quietly reviewed the documents. One of them looked up. The communication trail was deliberately interrupted. The second attorney nodded. And these authorization papers appear fraudulent. At that exact moment, another unexpected voice came from the back of the room. It wasn't just the paperwork. Everyone turned. It was Mr. Carson, the former site manager from Hale Urban Development. He walked slowly toward the front, holding a sealed envelope. Vesper Hale immediately stood. You shouldn't be here. Mr. Carson ignored him. I resigned yesterday. He handed the envelope to Grandma. I spent years convincing myself I was only following orders. I can't do that anymore. Inside the envelope were internal company emails, meeting summaries, and financial approval records. One message immediately caught everyone's attention. It clearly instructed senior staff to isolate the property's legal owner, redirect all communication, and secure the land before any public redevelopment announcement. At the bottom of the email was Vesper Hale's electronic approval. The ballroom erupted into shocked conversations. Vesper finally lost his composure. He pointed toward my parents. They agreed to everything. My father closed his eyes. He didn't deny it. Instead, he quietly answered, "Yes, we did." The confession silenced the room once again. Only minutes later, investigators entered the banquet hall. Someone attending the event had already contacted the authorities after reviewing the evidence. The officers spoke briefly with the attorneys, collected copies of the documents, and asked Vesper Hale to accompany them for questioning. He tried to argue. He insisted everything had been misunderstood. No one believed him anymore. My parents were also questioned, but unlike Vesper, they chose to cooperate fully once they realized the evidence was overwhelming. Over the following months, investigators uncovered multiple fraudulent land acquisitions connected to Hale Urban Development. Several redevelopment approvals were revoked. Numerous forged filings were invalidated. Our property was officially restored to Grandma's ownership. On a quiet autumn morning, Grandma and I finally unlocked the front door of the little stone house together. Dust covered every surface. The garden had become wild. The walls needed repair. But it was ours. Grandma smiled as she handed me the original brass key she had protected for years. I bought this place because I believed it would become the beginning of your future. I hugged her tightly. And now it finally can. Instead of selling the property, we restored it carefully. The downstairs became a community art studio where young artists could paint, sketch, and learn without paying expensive rental fees. The old workshop behind the house became my illustration studio, exactly as Grandma had imagined years earlier. As for my parents, The court ordered them to surrender every financial benefit they had received from the fraudulent redevelopment scheme. The luxury apartment they had been promised was confiscated. Their investment profits disappeared. Business partners abandoned them. Their reputation never recovered. Vesper Hale faced criminal convictions for fraud, forgery-related offenses, and corruption connected to multiple redevelopment projects. His company collapsed. The luxury neighborhood he wanted to build was permanently redesigned after the historic district received legal protection. The one house he tried hardest to erase became the reason his entire empire fell apart. Looking back now, I understand something I never truly appreciated before. Greed rarely destroys everything in a single day. It grows quietly through small compromises, convenient excuses, and decisions people convince themselves are temporary. But the truth has a remarkable way of surviving. Sometimes it waits inside forgotten documents. Sometimes inside old photographs. Sometimes inside the memories of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. And eventually, it finds its way home. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you enjoyed this emotional family mystery filled with unexpected twists and satisfying justice, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing what you would have done in my situation, and subscribe to the channel for more original stories every week. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate the value of the truth.